Back in the 80s, we put on parties in the desert, and we called ourselves Desolation Center.
Is the punk movement part of the Nazi movement?
No, it's the police. That's the Nazi movement.
The early 80s was a time of experimentation and rebellion.
The LAPD freaked out about punk rock like it was the second coming of the Black Panthers.
I started thinking I need to apply some of the out-of-the-box punk rock thinking. Why couldn't we put this kind of really cool music into this desert environment? But how many things could go wrong, you know?
Total anarchy.
That desert environment is awesome for acts of freedom.
It was beyond a theory, you know? It was made real. This gig makes total sense.
And I just remember thinking, this is transformative. Those shows reflected that spirit of, I'm going to make it happen.
It was definitely one of those doors that opens and you're kind of different on the other side.
I was kind of hoping to see the hillside come down on everybody, but that's my disappointment.
Hello, and welcome to Documenting Reality, a podcast hosted by the new documentary channel. I am your host, Fred Ruttman, here to take you on a small documentary ride with some of the filmmakers who are present on the channel. Today, we have Stuart Swezey with us, and he has a Swezey. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
All right, now that we got that out of the way.
Okay. And he's an impressive guy, I've got to tell you, but I think I'll just let you start off telling your story and I'll pipe in.
Okay, sure. So the film that's on the documentary channel is called Desolation Center, and it was a long time in coming in the sense that I made a feature documentary about some events that I organized, with a bunch of punk rock and alternative music friends in the early 80s, which was under the name Desolation Center. And
if I was going to describe you from your look, I would say this guy is punk.
Okay, yeah, and still alive. I was living in Los Angeles, born and bred, but there was a very vibrant scene here, and one of the groups that I was really a big fan of and friends with were the Minutemen, who, kind of looking back on it, were really innovative and important. And so I think, it was like I started putting on these shows just in downtown spaces and warehouse spaces and stuff. And it was the same time as the LAPD was led by Daryl Gates, and there was a lot of police crackdown on anything that they thought was punk, kids getting beaten up with batons. And it was just a lot of mayhem. And so rather than deal with that, I got inspired by a drive through the desert, through Mexico, actually, the Sonora Desert, that what if we took this more like forward-looking, a little bit more, psychedelic kind of post-punk music and took it to the desert? It would kill two birds with one stone. It would get us away from these authorities that were, basically cracking down on what they saw as being this threat to society. And it also kind of opened things up and made it much more kind of a utopian experience. And so it was a very small thing, but we took three school buses out to this dry lake bed. So it was just two, basically what I considered headliners, but at the time they were not very well-known bands, the Minutemen and Savage Republic. Savage Republic had this whole kind of thing where they played metal percussion. They kind of had almost like a spaghetti western soundtrack, surf vibe going. And so it was perfect for the desert. So anyway, that was the first that was called Mojave Exodus of three events out in the desert. One of the Desolation Center shows actually we did on a boat just to switch it up and not go to the desert. So the Minutemen were from our harbor, which is called San Pedro, and they're very, blue collar, politically aware guys. And so I thought it was cool to put them on a boat and also playing with the meat puppets, if people know them, going around the harbor. So
you were like pirate radio.
Yeah, that was the whole idea. Was like, okay, we got these independent labels, we got like zines being published, but nobody's really questioning where groups played. And so I decided that was my job, was to kind of make these happenings. I was interested in filmmaking at the time, but I didn't really have the resources of in the early 80s. It was still a big deal. You had a video camera, and things like that. So I knew that the footage existed, but I kind of had moved on in life in terms of I started an alternative bookstore publishing company called Amok. Then I was working in TV. I produced a documentary called Better Living Through Circuitry. But I always wanted to do a music documentary. So anyway, Desolation Center came about through me getting more experience and kind of learning through YouTube and things like that these shows had become somewhat legendary, And one of the big things that I kind of haven't gotten to yet is that this was the West Coast premiere of Sonic Youth out in the middle of the Mojave Desert. And so that kind of introduced them to a lot of what was going on here. I mean, they knew about Black Flag and SST Records and all that, but reciprocally, I think they were discovered by a lot of people here that connected with them. And so that was an amazing show. That was also Meat Puppets playing out in the desert. Red Cross were actually the headliners. Sonic Youth were opening. Although I didn't really look.
Isn't that how it always goes?
Yeah. But I mean, for me, it was just kind of like everybody's playing. But even at that point in time, bands felt like they had certain status or whatever. But one of the guy who opened was Perry Farrell, who still was in a band called Psycom at the time, but he went on to do obviously Jane's Addiction, Lollapalooza, and he was really actually part of our little scene at the time. And even with the first desert show that we did, he was helping me take tickets to get on the bus and stuff like that. So anyway, by the time I made the documentary, I started seeing that things had evolved from these little, I mean, there were small scale events. And one of the other events that I didn't really get into yet was with a German group from Berlin called Einstürzende Neubauten, who were very important in terms of the evolution of industrial music. And they were literally playing like road leveling equipment and going around. The day before the show, we went around construction sites and put on jumpsuits and just grabbed metal and stuff like that. And then that was amazing out in the middle of the desert. And that was combined with a machine art group, Survival Research Laboratories, which some people might be familiar with from the Bay Area. And they were blowing up refrigerators so that was like the opening act for that show.
That's performance art.
Yeah, total performance art. Yeah. And they've, Mark Pauline, who's the main Survival Research Laboratory person, has done incredible, pretty large scale things. So there's I guess a thread you can make between what we were doing as Desolation Center and Lollapalooza, but also and Burning Man. And one really, there's a important guy, John Law, who was a volunteer with Survival Research Laboratories, but he was really the one that said, hey, again, it was the cops. The cops are shutting us down at the beach in San Francisco with the Burning Man. Why don't we take it out to the desert? I knew John just through my bookstore and kind of being part of this, 80s, 90s alternative culture. But I didn't realize he had been inspired by these shows that I did until very much later. So that was the connection to Burning Man, which I think, again, we can talk about that a little bit more. he was important in the origin of it. I think both of us would really not want to be associated with what it became. But to be fair. And then the last thing was Coachella, which also has like become a whole different animal. But Gary Tovar was the guy who started Golden Voice that puts on those shows. Um, he he brought Einstürzende Neubauten to a venue in Pasadena, which is near where the fires are going on right now. And then the next day, I was able to bring them out to the desert because I couldn't have afforded to bring them here to LA. But Gary was on the bus with the rest of us out to the desert and walking around. And so it turns out that the site that we used for that show was about 15 miles from Coachella, and there's connections there. So I, kind of in the course of making this project that was originally just about these 3 or 4 shows, I started to see these other connections coming about. So I kind of brought that into the project as well.
So just to trying to sum this up, you're 20 years old or so?
Yeah.
And you basically created yourself a job by creating essentially DIY, do it yourself, DIY concerts.
Totally. Yes. And I'm not saying that there had never been a DIY concert, because I think that was something that people were trying to do, but there was a lot of, like I said, the powers that be were trying to shut them down. So I, instead of doing nomadic stuff around where the cops were, my idea was to take it out and bring it out to the desert, and that, as well as on this whale watch boat in San Pedro Harbor. But the thing that I think that was also important was it was kind of doing 2 things at the same time. It was avoiding repression, but it was also opening up this more transcendent experience for the people that were there because of this amazing setting that the desert is. And I think also, like, being from Southern California, I just really felt like this is something that we could do here that you couldn't do in, let's say, London or New York or Toronto or wherever, because of the particular landscape that we have. And I wanted to take advantage of that.
So you've probably worked with hundreds of musicians. Is Perry the most successful that's come out of your
I would
cauldron?
say he's probably the best known out of all the people that were involved in any of these shows. But I mean, in terms of like Sonic Youth, I think as a band, probably also, as 4 people, kind of playing music, have an amazing track record as well. So those would probably be the 2 biggest reference points for people.
So in the documentary, do you go back and interview some of these performers?
Yeah, I pretty much interviewed as many of the people as I could, people that were open to it, as well as really trying to mix it up with audience members or people that were interesting parts of the scene that weren't famous, because I kind of wanted to get both.
Did you have an interview that sort of like blew your socks off? It was like, I wasn't expecting this, but this is film gold.
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy named Sean Delir who was, I mean, everybody around the LA scene would have known Shandy. He actually died before I was able to finish the film and release it. But this gender fluid Black, just really creative individual who's almost like his best art piece was just being himself and being out there. And I really wanted to interview him, but he had already moved to Vienna by this time, which wasn't an insurmountable problem, but I ran into him at a Red Cross show, and he was about to pack up and move everything to Vienna. And I got him to sit down for an interview, and it was like a 4-hour interview. And he just has an amazing voice. I think he was able to articulate things so well. I mean, considering like there are a lot of like psychedelics substances going on.
I'm shocked. I'm just shocked.
his recall was amazing, and kind of corroborated certain things that I was not aware of. Like, for instance, with Survival Research Laboratories, they set off a like explosive charge, and it was some kind of metal plate that went flying over the audience, but not very much, not like more than 10 feet over the audience.
Mhm.
So Mark Pauline was talking about that. I'm like, wow, did anybody know that? Like, I didn't see that. And then Shandi was like, oh yeah, it was incredible. You could see it spinning overhead, and it was like, let's have anarchy now. So anyway, just things like that. So that was amazing. And sadly, he never got to see the film. But
Mhm.
since then, I kind of, as a bit of an homage, I put together a short interview, like an 8-minute film with some highlights of his life and the interview that we did.
Mhm.
And there's a book now of his diaries from when he was 14 years old, and just like sort of pre-AIDS crazy sex diaries and glory holes and bowling alleys and things like that. And the person who I've now gotten to know, who edited the book, Cesar Padilla, uses that film as like an opening for when they do readings and things like that. So that was very gratifying.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
So these guys had some pretty interesting lives.
Oh, for sure, for sure. We kind of, yeah. I think everybody here, and I'm sure other cities equally, but I think everybody was sort of really in an experimental mode of like, how can we, you know, really push the envelope of experience and creativity too.
Mhm.
So I kind of wanted to document that particular vibe. It wasn't to me just about these 4 shows or 5 shows, whatever, but it was also like the spirit of independent music and kind of pushing the envelope of what performance could be, what music even could be, with something like Einstürzende Neubauten, where their percussion was just, a contact mic and a metal, uh, whatever, like road road leveling equipment and all that. So I just felt like it was a very open and sort of liberating time, and so I wanted to capture that as well.
Mhm. Those underground places or lifestyles, counterculture, are just amazing. I remember when I was in my early 20s and growing up in Winnipeg, we'd go to concerts that were in, old clothing manufacturing buildings and stuff like that. I don't know where they were getting the electricity from because these
Yeah,
buildings hadn't been used in years, but they were just so much fun.
yeah. No, there's something about that where you're doing something, you're pushing the envelope creatively, and you're doing it where you're not supposed to be. It could be a furniture warehouse, like the last show that I did as Desolation Center, which is in the film, was with the Swans, Sonic Youth, Saccharin Trust, and a few other groups, and it was in the Mission Furniture Company in downtown LA. So, and then like the dust was coming, it was so loud. It was when by the time the Swans were playing, the whole building was shaking, and so that was kind of like, because I started out doing stuff around downtown, and then I got the opportunity, the time, got funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, believe it or not, to bring Sonic Youth and Swans out to LA. And so I was like, well, I got to do that. So anyway, yeah. No, I think the urban venues, I mean, every place is different, and you can't just say, oh, it has to be the desert. I mean, it just depends where you are and how you
Mhm.
kind of use your environment, I think.
It's funny that the underground counterculture guy gets a national endowment for the arts grant.
Oh, that was the stars were definitely aligning, and that was after the same year I had been basically sued for criminal trespass by the federal government, the different department, the Bureau of Land Management, for the
Mhm.
last desert show. So like I got that settled up with a benefit show at a club called the Anti Club, and then a couple months later, a friend of mine was like, "We got this art foundation, we got this money, but like we don't know how to put on a concert." So anyway,
Yeah, it's quite amazing. And I think around Coachella, or what's now Coachella, it's like all these upscale RV resorts that people are using.
Yeah. I've never been to Coachella. I don't know that much. But it's not that far from Palm Springs and
Mhm.
Desert Hot Springs, two bunch palms and all that. So it's not surprising to me that there's some upscale stuff around there. But the particular stretch of highway where we did that show, there was like it's pretty much just like a beautiful canyon called Box Canyon, and then you get to the end of it, and there's a place called Mecca, California, and it's very agricultural and kind of a lot of undocumented workers, and it's pretty bleak down that way. So I just think that it just depends. But obviously Coachella became a thing where people were just willing to spend crazy money to go to this thing, and I don't get it. It's not my lifestyle, but yeah.
So what would have cost to get into one of your concerts back then?
Okay, in 1980s US dollars, something I think maybe 1250, including the bus ride
The bus.
back and forth.
That's hilarious. It's
Yeah,
amazing that the buses didn't break down because
really
generally
amazing. Yeah, I mean, and the bus drivers were game to just take them out on this dry lake bed. And actually, the first desert show that we did, we had a lot of problems with wind on this dry lake bed, and so we ended up having the buses become like the windbreak for the bands and the PA and stuff like that. And yeah, no, they were like, sure, we'll do this. But yeah, so many things could have gone wrong. Actually, one of the buses did blow a tire on the way home, so the show was over with, and then that became a whole episode. I didn't manage to put it into the film, but like it broke down on the freeway. There was some like kids that were maybe gangbangers or whatever that started throwing rocks at the bus, and then the kids on the bus were yelling at them, and anyway, somehow or other they got back on the road and got out of there.
I thought you were going to say the gangbangers came and changed the tire for you.
No, that would have been a good story. No, but yeah, a lot of things could have gone wrong, in hindsight, but no one was hurt. Everyone came back safely, and
Mhm. So what's next for you? I think, unless I'm confusing you with one of the other directors I'm going to interview, you've also done some reality TV.
I have done a lot of reality TV. I mean, in between producing my first music documentary that was directed by a friend of mine, John Reese, who helped me with Desolation Center. I worked in TV for a number of years, and mostly doing development, but I've also been a showrunner. The thing that I think, especially maybe in Canada, that would be best known as Ice Road Truckers,
Mhm.
which I developed for History Channel as VP of development, and so that became like a huge franchise. But I think doing development, you're always got very limited resources because they're like, we haven't sold the show yet. We can't put any money into it. And so I ended up doing a lot of stuff where I would run around just as a one-man band, shooting, doing audio and things like that to make what they call a sizzle reel.
Mhm.
And those experiences, I think, really helped me a lot in terms of being able to make a first feature documentary with limited resources. So I wasn't always loving the subject matter, but I think there's a lot you can learn in terms of kind of just being scrappy and doing things from that kind of work.
I like that, being scrappy. And
Yeah.
I think we need a little more of that in the world right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, it's a different time because everybody has a pretty good camera on their phone, and so
Mhm.
many things are possible. But at the same time, I think the access to how you reach people and things like that is really different. I mean, and so I think streaming on Netflix is very different now than what it was when, they were, first starting out and still mailing people their DVDs and stuff like that. So it's cool to have people like Documentary Channel. I watch a lot of Criterion Channel too, and really curated stuff. I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. So
Night
what?
Flight is another that Desolation Center has done really well on that streaming service.
Mm-hmm. It was in theaters, right?
Yes, it was like a DIY thing, but it started out at at the San Francisco Independent Film Festival. We played at the Roxy there, which is a cool long time art house. And then we sold the show out, and we had some really luminary people like John Law, Mark Pauline, Vale from Research Publications, my friend Ma, who's a poet, and we were invited back to do a regular theatrical run at the Roxy, and then that kind of triggered this idea. Well, hey, maybe we could do this other places. So I sort of pieced together an independent release, which I learned a lot from. I think as a filmmaker, I didn't realize how much I would love just watching the film with an audience. I don't know, it just didn't ever occur to me. And so I'm still doing it. Like we were just in Mexico City. We had a release, very recently in about like 10 cities in Mexico. And then I went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we played at, the Circle Cinema there. And it's part of a kind of a campaign to get D. Boone from the Minutemen to be awarded the Woody Guthrie Prize it's kind of like for people musicians that were socially conscious and political and stuff like that. So yeah, it's really it's kept a life, and it plays well to an audience. I think that's an experience that being in more film festivals and showing my film to an audience, I come to really appreciate how cool that is.
Mm-hmm. Is it difficult to get into the film festivals?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a tough question because it depends which festival you're talking about, and it depends what your project is. And, obviously a lot of more people want to get into festivals than they can program. I kind of feel like my film found the festivals that it made sense for looking back on it. Like we had our world premiere at a festival called CPH Docs in Copenhagen, and they're very music oriented, and it's a really well curated festival. I didn't know what I was doing at that point in time in terms of submissions and stuff. But my friend John was like, well, you should do CPH Docs. I'm like, what's that? And then I looked at their site and it was like, oh, I missed the deadline, and yet I submitted and I got like immediate feedback, and I was looking through all these comments in Danish. And so I put it into Google Translate. I'm like, what are these guys saying? And I was like, oh, this is pretty dope. So, I was like, cool. And then the Slam Dance Festival has been amazing. That's here, that was our US premiere almost a year later because we got turned down by so many festivals in the United States. Actually, we didn't been in Doxa in Vancouver much earlier than the US. But after that, it really led to other things like playing at good cinemas here in Los Angeles, like the ArcLight, which doesn't exist anymore. But so they've been very supportive, and so that felt good. Like again, like I found the right festival for the film.
So we're almost out of time. We're in the 30-minute-ish mark.
Okay.
What would you like to share with the audience before we leave?
I just think that what I'd like to share is that this film is not about nostalgia. It's really about people, the DIY spirit, people taking, creative things and presenting what you're doing, just questioning assumptions and doing things in innovative ways. That's what I hope that people get out of it.
Yeah, being scrappy and creative.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Well, Stuart, thank you so much for being on. Very much appreciated. And you certainly bring a unique perspective to the documentaries because you didn't follow a pattern. like they
Right.
traditionally do. So
Totally.
self-taught and pretty amazing.
Well, thanks so much. Yeah.
Thank
Great
you so
talking.
much for coming on. And thank you to everybody tuning in to, what's the name of our podcast again? Documenting Reality.
All right.
We had a lot of fun trying to come up with that name. So Documenting
That
Reality brought to you by the Documentary Channel, streaming now. So please like, subscribe, share, and check out some more of Stuart's work.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right.